America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday, December 31st edition of Point of View. Only a few hours left before the end of 2025. And as you might imagine, we have a number of guests lined up, as well as, again, a reminder that we are dependent upon your gifts to continue this program. And many of the questions that some of you have had, I think, can be answered by pointing out that started out with a matching challenge, $155,000. We're down to $53,000. So we've made very good progress, but of course, there is still room for you as well. We're going to work our way through a couple of very important guests and topics, but the first one we certainly wanted to make would be Gary Bauer, who is an individual that is the head of American Values, and we do have a link to that and even one of his end-of-day reports, which we're going to quote from. He also is the chairman of the Campaign for Working Families. We also have a link to that one in case you would like to follow that as well. As you remember, he, under Ronald Reagan, served as the domestic policy advisor, and it is always a delight to have him on the program. So I guess I could say almost Happy New Year, Gary.
Well, Happy New Year to you, Kerby. And hey, that's a fantastic match. Congratulations. I mean, that shows the commitment of some successful person to what you do. And occasionally I give one of those matches, and it's always a wonderful thing and a real opportunity for your friends and supporters to step up.
Yesterday, we, of course, had Kelly Shackelford on and encouraged you not only to support Point of View, but to support First Liberty. Today, of course, we have Gary Bauer. And again, I will say the same thing. I hope that you will not only consider supporting Point of View, but also Gary Bauer. One of the reasons we've posted his end-of-day report is so that you can read one of those. I think everybody should subscribe to it. And second of all, I think you should support him as well. And he does have an end-of-day report coming out with what the difference a year makes. But Gary, I thought we might focus for just a few minutes on Minnesota. I was tempted to start out with a humorous thing like, have you heard about what's going on in Minnesota? Of course, any listener to Point of View knows we talk about you when you're not on. Most of what we know about what's going on by the Somalis or Tim Walz either comes from Gary Bauer's end-of-day report or from somebody most of us had never heard of, a YouTuber by the name of Nick Shirley. And I think between the two of you, you've done a better job covering the story than the entire collective legacy media, which I think is something we need to talk about as well. But you've been following this scandal, and it has gotten worse every single day because we find out more.
You know, this is one of those things where you can't possibly exaggerate, because whatever adjectives you use to describe it, by the next day, 24 hours later, it's already surpassed that. And it really is, it's a scandal, Kerby, with national implications, because we're beginning to see reports out of the state of Maine, this morning out of Ohio, other places being mentioned, where the same kind of scams were being run, and sadly also associated with Somalis living in these various states. So there's so much to say here. One of them being that, when you live in a state like Minnesota, where everything's controlled by the left and Democrats, they're not really interested in making sure there's not cheating going on. They're interested in expanding the reliance of people on government. It's in states where you've got some conservative voices and conservative people in government that they go, well, look, let's figure out how to help people, but let's make sure we do it in a way that doesn't waste the hard-earned money of the American taxpayer.
Yes. Well, and again, you just one of the things that has come from this YouTuber is the child care centers. And I was thinking, Gary, if you have any trouble raising funds there at American Values, maybe just write to the governor, Tim Walz, and just say you've got a child care center there in Minnesota and to send money to your organization, because it seems like anybody with just a little bit of moxie and just a little bit of creativity has been able to create a child learning center. And then when this YouTuber went to these learning centers, found out there's no children there. And then when you have the Minnesota press cover it, they say, well, they've been a little bit lax on some of the various regulations, but that's about all that is. And I'm thinking, are we living in two different universes? It's just the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Now, Kerby, are you actually going to get that picky and insist there be children in the child learning center? I mean,
they get $2 million for an empty learning center. If that's
yes, and they misspelled learning, by the way.
Yeah.
Which I mean, whoever did that has a real future ahead in the National Education Association. But, now look, I don't know if you noticed this. The first story that was put out about that learning center was, oh, well, it actually isn't in business anymore. They were for a number of years, but there's no children there because basically they closed down. But somebody didn't tell the cheaters that owned the learning center because yesterday morning, all of a sudden, there were 50 kids at the learning center. So it's just, this would be laughable, and you and I are both laughing, but as you know, there's indications that the total here, it could be in the billions, and a lot of money ended up apparently in the hands of Islamic extremists in Somalia. So this really is a scandal that everybody ought to pay attention to.
And again, let's recognize that the people that have run the scam are guilty, but there's a secondary sense of guilt as well, and that's why I want to focus on the governor, because didn't he run for vice president or something like that? And there we have had even the Associated Press said there's been about $200 billion in money that's been stolen from the COVID era relief packages and things like that, and we've had Dr. Merrill Matthews on talking about the scandals of Medicare and Medicaid and the rest. And some of that is going to always happen because you have people that are always going to work the system, whether from this country or another country. But when you have the governor who's spending more time talking about whether or not to have tampons in the men's restrooms and isn't willing to even listen to the whistleblowers, but instead punishes the whistleblowers, I think we've got something wrong at the very top, don't you?
Oh, there's no question about it. And, Governor Walz, when he was in what ended up being a pretty embarrassing vice presidential debate with J.D. Vance, Governor Walz bragged about the fact that child care was a growing industry in Minnesota because he said we made it a lot easier to get a license and open a child care center. He didn't mention he made it so easy that you don't actually need children for the center.
Just unbelievable.
It definitely does land on his desk. And, there's also video that indicates that the scam here was not just the people running the center, because the video shows parents, in many cases Muslim women, taking their children to some of these centers, staying there for a half hour or an hour with them, and then leaving, and on the way out they got an envelope.
So again, we're taking a break. We'll continue our conversation with Gary Bauer. And again, don't forget, we are depending upon your financial gifts to keep this discussion going, and we'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One of the most influential figures in the development of the American government was the English philosopher John Locke. Thomas Jefferson explained that many of the ideas he drafted into the Declaration of Independence came from Locke. Joe LeConte, who has been a guest on my radio program, has written an insightful essay on the gospel according to Locke. As you might gather from the title, he spends much of the essay showing the connection between Locke's philosophy and biblical principles. The first was his insistence that every human being bore the imprint of an intelligent, personal, and purposeful creator. He wrote that we are the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker. This is an obvious allusion to Ephesians 2:10, where Paul writes that we are God's workmanship. Locke rejected the idea of the divine right of kings, which was used to justify political absolutism. Instead, he argued that government should be based on the consent of the governed. He said if the political authority tries to oppress God's servants by threatening their life, liberty, or property, it becomes morally illegitimate. Locke also rejected the idea of a national creed, Catholicism in France or Calvinism in Geneva. Rather, government should provide equal justice for people of all faiths. No one should be denied essential civil rights because of religion. Joe LeConte concludes that the American founders, supported by the nation's clergy, thoroughly absorbed Locke's political principles from the separation of powers to the separation of church and state. He also adds that Locke was a lifelong student of the Bible. So as you can see, the principles of John Locke provided the foundation for American government. It's time to return to those principles rooted in God's Word. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Israel, go to viewpoints.info/Israel. Viewpoints.info/Israel. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you've been waiting to the last day, well, it is the last day. So those of you that have been listening to the program know that we are encouraging you to support Point of View. In just a minute, we're also going to talk about how we think you should be supporting American values. But you can do that by simply going to the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Give Now. Or, of course, you can call us if you'd like to do so. And I know a number of people have done that. 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't expect a lot of phone calls because everybody loves Gary Bauer and they don't want to take a moment away from hearing what he's got to say. But I hope that some of you, even as we're talking right now, might even think about going to the website. You can listen and click on that button and make it easy for us as well. Last time I checked, we were down to about $53,000 left for the match. So there's a dollar for dollar match for you. But Gary, let's get back to this and then also maybe talk about what a difference a year makes, because your piece that you had on the Walsh fraud scandal grows. You talked about, of course, the fraudsters. Just a minute ago, you talked about the fact that many of the mothers were in on it. I just also mentioned the fact that the governor actually went out of his way to punish the whistleblowers rather than to thank them. But there's one other group that I think deserves a little bit of criticism, and that's the media. Because yesterday I took an article, The Left's Top Lies, 25 Lies of 2025, which I notice you've just posted as well at the websites that you have, and we went through a few of those. And oftentimes media bias, Gary, as you well know, comes by what you don't say. And it's not like this is the first time we found out that there was this kind of fraud and scandal in Minnesota. I think many of us had an idea that it was actually occurring when Tim Walz was running as a vice presidential candidate for the United States of America.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And in fact, this is one of the defenses that people in the media and even people close to the governor are saying right now, that, oh, look, this has been going on for years. The Republicans are just grabbing onto it now because they want to hurt the governor. Well, wait a minute. You knew it was going on for years? So we're supposed to let it go on for more years? It just doesn't make any sense. And my heart goes out, Kerby, to the people of Minnesota, hardworking people of all ethnic and racial backgrounds who get up early and work hard and long hours to put a little bit of money aside, pay significant taxes to the state and to the federal government, and then their leaders end up not really caring when that money gets ripped off by these really criminals. It's almost like a criminal gang. and the corruption is very, very deep. So I think there's a lot of accountability that needs to happen here, and I think this is going to be in the news probably for most of 2026.
Yeah, I got a feeling that we're going to be finding out more all the time. The old phrase, tip of the iceberg, is certainly true for that. And just before we move on, I just thought for a minute I might mention, I know you have 3 children. I have 3 children. But 2 of mine, my daughters, every once in a while send me a YouTube video or a TikTok video. I tend to look at YouTube. I don't tend to look at TikTok. But there are a number of young people in TikTok right now that are saying, why should I even give money? Why should I even pay taxes? Because, first of all, you spend it on wars that we shouldn't be engaged in. You spend it on all sorts of graft and scandal. You spend it on a fraud example and scandal that's unfolding in Minnesota now, as you mentioned, Ohio, probably a number of other states as well. You can see why there is a whole generation of young people that are just getting pretty sick of how our money is being spent, and yet they need to be very involved in this next election to make sure that we put the right people in office to prevent some of this from happening again.
Well, that's a great analysis, Kerby. You're absolutely right. And we got a lot going on among our children, our daughters and sons and grandchildren. There's a lot of bad trends. Cynicism is one of them, but there's lots of reasons to legitimately be cynical when you see a bunch of politicians running around telling you they're going to solve this and solve that. And then they end up coming into office and all they do is raise your taxes and then give the money out or let it be stolen by some of their favorite voting blocs. And I think that's exactly what's happened in Minnesota. I hope young people are paying attention because it will instruct them. It will help them make a better choice in November of 2026 when we reelect the House of Representatives, a third of the United States Senate, and when the people of Minnesota get a chance to return Governor Walz for a third term, or whether they get wise, get smart, and replace him.
Yes. I might just mention next hour we will have Chelsey Youman with us, and we're going to be talking about the Next Generation Roundtable. And I thought for just a minute, Gary, we might talk about the fact that on Point of View, we not only, of course, cover this 2 hours a day, we post all sorts of articles, we have 3 different podcasts, we have booklets, we have magazine material, all sorts of other resources. But you've been around with us long enough to know that individuals that want to give to the future of this country certainly can be importantly involved by simply giving to Point of View.
There's no question about it, Kerby. When I always appreciate you say kind things about my end of day report, but when I send that out, and I'm happy to do that, the people that I want everybody to see it, but I know when you see it and people like you that have your own platforms and you have a substantial one, people look up to you. They know you spread accurate information. I know when you see it, it's going to be then talked about and seen by a lot of other people. So we know the media is no friend of ours, by and large, and we can see it in this scandal. So news sources like Point of View, with people like you, whose character is unquestioned. Everybody knows what your values are. People, including young Americans, desperately need news sources like what you provide. And anybody listening today, I've said this before when you've had me on, if you were planning on giving to American values and you can only give one gift, give it to Point of View, because we're on the same team. And without people like Kerby, my work in Washington would go nowhere.
Well, I hope that you would do both. And, of course, we also have that link. And I'll give you a preview of what's going to be coming out in just a few hours, because you've actually put together a reminder of how, in some cases, we were dealing with open borders and record illegal immigration. Now we have a closed border. We have all sorts of policies that were really hurting the economy. Now that We're starting to see reducing the taxes and wage growth. We're seeing, instead of an expanding government, even the possibility of a dismantling of the Department of Education, and even some of the concerns we talked about yesterday with Kelly Shackelford. There used to be an assault on religious liberty and censorship and the rest. Now we are seeing something very different. And so, as much as you and I tend to talk about the negatives, what a difference a year makes.
It really is. It's been incredible. It's only, by the calendar, it's not even a full year because Donald Trump didn't take the oath of office until January 20th. So he actually has got another 3 weeks here. Who knows what he'll do? But we have had tremendous progress across the board. I've been in Washington way too long, and I can tell you that I've never seen anything like this. This is really unprecedented. And I guess one of the downsides is that because he's solving some of these things like the border, that issue is dropping in what people are worried about. Don't stop worrying about it, because if the other guys get in, they'll open that border in 24 hours, and we'll be right back to mobs marching toward the border of the United States.
Easy. Yeah. Well, Gary, it is always a delight to have you on. And as I said, Happy New Year's. Certainly would hope people would consider supporting American values, and certainly supporting you and listening to you on radio and reading your end-of-day report. And as always, it's just a great delight to have you on, and look forward to the next opportunity. It's mutual, Kerby. God bless you. Keep up the great work. And once again, to your faithful listeners, please step up now while there's still time, and support Point of View and Kerby. The job they do is second to none. You can do that very easily by going to the website, pointofview.net. There's a button there that says Give Now, and you could give a one-time gift or a monthly gift, and I hope that you will consider what you might do to do that. Let me also say that if you would like to talk to someone, that number is 800-347-5151. I recognize not many people tend to make that phone call when Gary Bauer is on. Well, now we have a break. So if you wanted to talk to someone and put it on your credit card, 800-347-5151. We have Lathan Watts in studio right after this.
I have little doubt that you already know that in today's world, especially online and through the media, it is lies which are competing for people's attention. And that's why it's critical that we as a nation become re-anchored to biblical truth. We will never restore America's godly heritage without that. When you give to Point of View, you equip listeners around America with that truth. You provide free resources that help them apply truth to real questions, everyday life. You invest in the future of this nation. Your support will make a difference in the fight against lies, in the fight for America's future. And we need to hear from you today. Give before midnight tonight, and your gift will be doubled by a matching challenge. The hours are waning. Give now at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson. Wednesday, December 31st, only a few hours before the end of 2025. And the hours are ticking away as well, as we're encouraging you. If you have been thinking about supporting Point of View, we have come to the 11th hour. And so if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate that. We'll continue counting some of those gifts that might come in with phone calls, more importantly, probably through the website until midnight. But I would encourage you, if you have not gone to the website
website. First of all, you're going to want to find some of these articles. One of these by Lathan Watts. School districts are keeping parents in the dark over social transitioning. Oh, please tell me that's not true. And unfortunately, it is. And so we'll talk about education. Then we're going to get into the issue of free speech and censorship. And so, again, if you're not familiar, Lathan Watts is the Vice President of Public Affairs for Alliance Defending Freedom. And Happy New Year. But it's great to see you again.
Yeah, good to be back.
And so we'll get that microphone on here in just a minute. And let me, while we're talking about that, point out that one of the resources we make available on a regular basis is our booklets. Here's the one on transgenderism, the whole issue of gender transition and social transitioning, which we'll talk about more in the second hour, because that's another article that we have posted. But here, if nothing else, Lathan, let's get into this, because one of your colleagues, Senior Counsel Matt Sharp, actually should be getting combat pay because he went to Congress and testified to the subcommittee on early childhood, elementary, and secondary education about the fact that you've identified, and this is just shocking, that at least 1,000, and I'm saying just at least 1,000 school districts, which are attended by about 12 million students, have a secret transition policies that direct school officials to hide information about the children from the parents. And I thought the parents have the responsibility of raising their kids.
Well, you're right. They do. But
what is going on?
These, at least 1,000 school districts around the country seem to think that they know what's best for the kid more than the parents do. And they treat the parents, at best as an obstacle, and, at worst as, somebody that has to be kept at arm's length, for the best interests of the child. And when we're talking about social transitioning in schools, what we're talking about is using inaccurate pronouns or a different name while the child is there at school. But then some of these districts, their policies include up to, concealing this from the parents by anytime they talk to the parent, they use the correct name and pronouns. And some of these policies are, they're sort of official, they're in writing. Some of them are not really written down anywhere, but when teachers go through training for the year, it's sort of pushed out that way.
Right.
We had a former client also testified in that hearing, Deb Figliola, who talked about the teacher training that she was provided by her district, basically, instructing them how to keep this from parents and that they should keep it from parents. She could not in good conscience do that. And we ended up suing that school district and protecting her and two other teachers' religious liberty rights. So this issue touches, several things. For a teacher, like for her, that was a religious liberty issue. There's also the parental rights issue. Right. And then even for some teachers who may or may not be religious at all, there's still a compelled speech issue. They may not have a religious belief on this issue. They might just happen, as a school teacher you would hope, to have passed ninth grade biology and understand that boys do not become girls or vice versa. And they just have, but they're being compelled to speak these inaccurate pronouns or things like that. So this hits a lot of different legal issues.
How about child abuse, too? Because some of the teachers that have an agenda might even begin to force some of those ideas on individuals. Yeah, I mean,
we've seen, in some of our cases, and then just, if you pay attention to this sort of thing in the news and social media, you hear about, this sort of this topic or this curriculum being forced into even very, very early, kindergarten, first grade curriculum. In fact, that was, a Supreme Court case recently, the Mahmoud versus Taylor case.
There you go.
Out of Maryland, where the parents sued and had to go all the way to the Supreme Court because the school district had this curriculum and did not allow parents to opt their children out of it. And the Supreme Court, in a much more articulate way, said you can't do that. The children are not, creatures of the state, which is a quote from a 1930s Supreme Court case.
Very true.
And that opinion in Mahmoud versus Taylor was very clear about the religious beliefs of these parents and the parental rights aspect of it, that they have the right to direct the upbringing of their children. And so if you're going to have this sort of thing, you can't do it and then also tell the parents, and you don't have a choice. You can't take your kid out of this curriculum. So it's an issue that we're seeing all over the country, and it's not just in, where people might think, well, this is a San Francisco, LA, New York kind of thing. We had a case on this very issue in a school district in Houston, blood red state of Texas, where we had to take represent parents, and we ended up being able to settle that without having to go to court. But we were on the cusp of serious litigation against the school district for doing this very thing and keeping it from the parents.
Let's remind people what school districts do, and I love your line here. Consider the absurd paradox that schools must get parental consent for administering aspirin, taking students on a field trip, and allowing them to participate in extracurricular activities, yet parents are kept in the dark on social transitioning. Now, some people might say, well, this is just whether or not to use the right pronouns, but you can figure out very quickly that if all of a sudden you're encouraging a child to have female pronouns when they're a male or male pronouns when they're a female, all of a sudden one day they pop up and say, I also need to go more than that and take the next step, which we'll talk about more in the second hour in terms of this whole idea of gender care, which is now being challenged by RFK Jr. of all people, and all the studies have been done there, and some of those that we've talked about here before. So there's a lot more at stake, but again, just look at the irony or the paradox, the fact that on almost anything else, as long as it doesn't have to do with human sexuality, you have to get parental permission for anything you do with a child.
Yeah, as you should. This, it's just like the examples that I listed there. If a kid's got a headache, you can't get an Advil without calling the parents. Yeah. Or having some form on file that the parents have signed and acknowledged, yes, it's okay, give them an Advil so he can, field trip, you name it, pretty much everything. But yet you're going to keep this from parents. And it's really, it really sort of drives a wedge between the parent and the child.
Yes, it does.
In a time where if a child is truly requesting this, that's a very serious mental health issue where that child needs their parents the most is when they're struggling. And you're keeping the parents out of this scenario. It makes absolutely no sense.
In the old days, before we had all of this wokeness and transgender ideology and all the rest, it does seem to me that there was maybe a mindset that said, if Bobby keeps thinking he's a girl, the first person I want to tell is mom and dad, because maybe they might think about counseling. But now it's flipped it around to say, if Bobby thinks he's a girl, well, then we just need to refer to him in the feminine. And maybe eventually he could even come and put on a dress when he gets to school. And all this is being played out. So eventually one day comes to the parents and say, well, I think I need to do everything. I need to take some things off and take certain kinds of various other kinds of hormones. And it's just an illustration of this. So if this is news to you, this is why we wanted you to read this very good piece by Lathan Watts. And it is our third article that we've posted for you today about school districts, and not just a few, at least 1,000 school districts. And then you go in and talk about how some of the Democrats just said it was a false narrative, which you said is kind of, for those of you who don't speak politician, a thinly veiled attack on, well, the witnesses here are liars. No, they're not. It shows you this extent to which that goes. So let's take a break. When we come back, though, every time we talk with Lathan Watts, it seems like lately we talk about the attack on free speech, and that's a big issue with ADF. And certainly we have focused some of the time and attention on this country, but I thought, as we oftentimes do with him, because ADF is also in Europe, to talk about what's going on there. So we have an article about the blessings of free speech, also one that we had the other day on multiculturalism and free speech, which gets into our booklet that I've made available on censorship. Probably going to do a new one just simply because of all these stories we get out of ADF. But let's take a break. That's a perfect time. If you have been waiting to make a phone call, let me encourage you to do so. 800-347-5151. If you want to support this ministry, that is one way to do it. An easy way to do it as well is simply to go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says Give Now, or if you receive emails from me, we just sent one out, and follow that link as well. any gift that you give is going to be doubled, dollar for dollar doubled. And so we'll take a break and continue our conversation with Lathan Watts right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us for a few more minutes, Lathan Watts, and then we're going to have a chance to get an update from the president of Point of View. But I thought for just a minute, one of the things I love about you, Lathan, in addition to your legal background, is your historical background. My commentary today is about John Locke, and you would know who that is. In my censorship booklet, I quote John Stuart Mill, who I point out is not a Christian, but certainly articulated this idea of free speech. And then I put together a whole section in here about how we to think about free speech. But somehow those ideas, which came from the European continent and have made their way to the United States and were actually put into the First Amendment, they seem to have forgotten about that in Europe. And one of the pieces I've posted here by James Freeman reminds us of the individual who is really heading up the European Union Commissioner for Internal Market and others that have actually promoted censorship and said that Elon Musk, if he actually did an interview on X with the, at that time, candidate Donald Trump, that would cross their line and illustrate again that today in Europe and in the UK, which used to talk about free speech, it's just not there anymore.
Sadly, that's correct. The UK keeps our international team very busy. And it's, as somebody like you kind of referred to, like a student of history, it's really sad to me as an American because the UK is sort of our mother country.
Yes.
Most of these principles that you're talking about, people, they call them sort of Enlightenment era principles, but they're enlightened because they're biblical.
Yes.
And, those principles that were spread by the British Empire, that took hold here and were really sort of even honed into a purer form in our Constitution. But it started there, and so it's really sad to see.
It is a sad commentary.
This happened to our, cousins across the pond. I mean, we have clients over there we've spoken about before, arrested for praying silently on a sidewalk. I mean, that is literally a thought crime. Like where the police officer asked them, "Are you praying?" And they said, "Well, in my mind," they slapped the cuffs on them and took them to jail. I mean, that's
unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And like we've said on here, probably too many times, like, this is the country of George Orwell. This is the country of Aldous Huxley. And it's like they read them as instruction manuals instead of cautionary tales. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then the EU, they have this Digital Services Act.
Oh, my goodness.
Which, you mentioned Elon Musk in that article. The Digital Services Act basically puts bureaucrats in any member country of the EU can look at anything on a social media platform, and if they don't, basically, if they, it's like everything they talk about trying to rein in hate speech. Of course, they don't really define what hate speech is. So the working definition is always, well, it's any speech that I hate.
Yes.
So if a bureaucrat looks at something on a social media platform and doesn't like it and tells that social media platform to take it down, like on X in Elon Musk's case, if he refuses, they can be fined up to 6% of their global revenue per offense.
Yes. And quite frankly, everything we've talked about over the last 45 minutes would have been categorized.
Absolutely.
I mean, Gary Bauer and Lathan Watts and Kerby Anderson are all guilty of hate speech from the EU's definition.
Yeah, and that's why Americans should care about this, because the EU is not discriminating against. They're not differentiating between the country of origin of the tweet or the X. They're going to Elon Musk and saying, take this down. And I mean, how many billions of users does he have? Do you think Twitter is actually going to go through and go, well, let's see where this one came from, this Watts guy in Texas? Well, that's America. They have the Bill of Rights there. I'm not sure if I can take that down. Well, now this guy's in Berlin, so maybe I can take his down. No. Are they going to risk 6% of their global revenue for that? Now, Elon Musk might. Yeah. He's just the guy to do it. But, Meta, Instagram, all of these other platforms are subject to it. and it is a censorship regime like really we haven't seen before.
I might just mention the other day we had this article on multiculturalism and free speech, and they were using a quote from the Premier of New South Wales who said, I acknowledge that we don't have free speech rules in the United States, and I make no apologies for that because we need to have the responsibility to knit together our community. And first of all, he says, well, that doesn't sound like a community if you need censorship. Second of all, no apologies. That shows you how blatant it is. And more importantly, almost looking down your nose at this idea of free speech. And then we have to hold the community together with censorship. Well, it doesn't sound like your multicultural community is very strong if you've got to hold it together with censorship. So that's from Australia, which again is all the things that have been happening since the attack on Jewish people on Hanukkah. That's just amazing to me.
Yeah, and even before that, we represented Billboard Chris in Australia.
That's right.
If you don't know who he is, look him up. He's a good follow on social media. And it was basically a very similar censorship regime in Australia that the EU has under the Digital Services Act. And it's and again, Australia, part of the Commonwealth, part of the former British Empire, where we learned these ideas from.
Yes. So again, we've had Lathan Watts in studio. I think what you are doing at ADF is just outstanding. Next hour, we're going to have Chelsey, and she's, of course, now with ADF as well. So you're the Vice President of Public Affairs. She's senior counsel working at the state. And first of all,
she's the one you should have had on camera. I've got a face made for radio. She's the one you should have in studio.
You look good. And you're wearing your ADF outfit there. Yeah. So again, I encourage you to support ADF. Of course, Marlon Maddox and many others were those involved in the beginning of that, whether it was Jim Dobson or D. James Kennedy or many others. So always great to have you in studio. And as always, I look forward to the next opportunity. Thank you for your articles today. But just before we take a break, Warren Kelly has come in. He is the president of Point of View, and we are down to about $50,000 and still have a need. So let's talk about that.
Well, we started out the hour at about $54,000 left on the match, and here at the end of the hour, we're at about $50,000 left on the match. So we're making some progress, but not nearly fast enough when you consider that we have less than 12 hours left in the day here before our match expires. So we really do need to hear from you. If you believe in Point of View and what we do, if you think that we're of value to our nation, then we need to pick up the phone or go online and make a generous gift right now.
Well, and again, Lathan, I appreciate that. You're a busy guy, but you were willing to come in studio today. And, of course, you're well aware of the fact that the ADF exists because a whole series of individuals who primarily were leaders in Christian media and other areas and felt the need to come together. So the connection between ADF and Point of View is a pretty strong connection, isn't it?
It is. It goes all the way back to the beginning for us. And, I love coming on here. This gives us an opportunity to talk directly to people across the country about the work that we're doing. Nobody wakes up wanting to be a client of ADF, and we don't want you to ever need us. But this is how we keep people informed about the work that we're doing. I say all the time, you don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be a constitutional scholar. But you do need to know when your rights are being violated, so you know when to contact us. So I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk about that. And let people know.
Let me just mention that, of course, we've encouraged you to support Point of View, but part of the reason is you got a chance to hear from Gary Bauer in the first half hour, Lathan Watts in the second half hour. You're going to hear from Chelsey Youman in just a few minutes, and then all sorts of others. And Warren, that's just one more reason why people should make that phone call.
Absolutely. We do need to hear from you. Like we said, it's coming down to the very final hours of the year. Please take a moment to give and to give generously.
Of course, you can go to the website, pointofview.net at any time, but I think during the break right now, which is an extended break, be a great time. If you've been wanting to make that phone call, now's the time to make it. 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. Of course, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. We have a lot more to cover, but we need to hear from you, so we'll be back right after this.
I have little doubt that you already know that in today's world, especially online and through the media, it is lies which are competing for people's attention. And that's why it's critical that we, as a nation, become re-anchored to biblical truth. We will never restore America's godly heritage without that. When you give to Point of View, you equip listeners around America with that truth. You provide free resources that help them apply truth to real questions, everyday life. You invest in the future of this nation. Your support will make a difference in the fight against lies, in the fight for America's future. And we need to hear from you today. Give before midnight tonight, and your gift will be doubled by a matching challenge. The hours are waning. Give now at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, and it is December 31st, and the hours are clicking away before the end of 2025. Let me just, as a program note, mention that tomorrow, since it is New Year's Day, we will play a tape, but then we'll be back live on Friday, and I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. Next Monday will also be a Next Generation Roundtable, and of course the host of that is Chelsey Youman, and she is a gifted individual who in the past has worked very much in the pro-life movement and worked with Human Coalition, but now is the senior counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom. She is involved in promoting ADF's policy and legislative work at the state level and really advising government officials on strategic pro-life information policies. And I might just mention again, we've been talking about the booklets. Here's one that we've done on a biblical point of view on abortion, which gives you some of the key arguments for pro-life issues, and then has a list of what I think are some of the best books ever written on the issue of pro-life and making the case for life. Also, this one by Liberty McCarter on chemical abortion, because that's become a bigger and bigger issue. So those are some resources that we have made available to you in the past. We'll continue to do so in the future. But again, Chelsey is not only an individual that is with ADF, of course, she has been the host of our Next Generation Roundtable. And one of the articles I've posted was an interview that was done recently with her about what it is like in this post-Roe world in terms of the abortion industry. So, Chelsey, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Oh, it's so great to be with you today, Kerby.
One of the things that we talked about just a few minutes ago with Lathan Watts is ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, and the connection between Point of View and ADF is very strong because Marlon Maddox, who is the host of Point of View, along with D. James Kennedy and Bill Bright and just a whole list of individuals, Larry Burkett and Don Wildman and others, were able to create ADF, and it has been so effective. So when you actually moved over there to ADF, I thought, well, it's almost like like you're coming back home because we've had such a great relationship with ADF. But talk about what you're doing, because you're working more at the state level and still bringing all your expertise on abortion to bear on many of those issues, aren't you?
That's absolutely correct. Alliance Defending Freedom really is involved in every single point of the funnel for our laws, whether that's developing legislation on the front end, running those bills, lobbying for those bills at the state level to protect our rights. And they work on a whole host of issues, pro-life issues, pro-family issues, most recently passing protections for girls in women's sports, protection for girls from having men in their bathrooms in most safe and private spaces. And then they work down that funnel once bills are passed to help defend the laws on the back end through the court systems, and have had many cases before the Supreme Court, even just this term. And so they're really incredible. And the goal and entire heart behind the Alliance Defending Freedom ministry is to advance our freedom, to really be that stalwart in a culture that doesn't respect our religious liberty rights, our rights of conscience, our rights of speech, let alone our rights to life. ADF is there to defend each one of those and try to continue pushing forward our freedoms across the United States and even internationally.
One of the things that we have made available to our listeners is a video of you being interviewed at Texas Faith Fest, which is done by our good friends of Texas Values. And Texas Values is a group that kind of spun off from what originally was an organization that held both First Liberty Institute and Texas Values. So in some respects, that also is sort of you coming home, because we first learned about you through First Liberty Institute. So there is a lot of connections. But one of the things that you talked about there was the fact that there maybe is a mindset which says, well, now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe versus Wade, and that happened a couple of years ago, obviously, then there's not as much to do. And I picked up from your interview, actually, there's a whole lot more to do, if for no other reason than because more and more abortions are chemical abortions. Can you speak to that?
Yes, you're exactly right, Kerby. I'm so glad you brought that up, because what we're seeing, unfortunately, since Roe was overturned, is an increase in the abortion rate. We had the highest abortion rate last year that we had had in 12 years. And that's because of what you're alluding to, Kerby, the increase in chemical abortion or abortion drugs. What that is it's a 2-pill regimen. Women take a pill that ends the life of her child by cutting off progesterone and all the hormones to the baby needed for that baby to continue living. Once the baby's dead, she'll take a second pill that induces premature labor. And it's a horrific process. And it's one, that I think people are learning about. And it's one that can occur all alone in her home without any supervision from a doctor. She simply logs online, orders the pills. They're on her doorsteps within a day or two. And we're seeing not just an increase in rampant death and genocide for these young babies and children, but we're also seeing major complications for these women. By the FDA's own admission, 1 in 20 of these women will end up in the ER with all kinds of horrific complications like hemorrhage. They're losing fallopian tubes. You name it, it's happening. And it's because of a predatory abortion industry that says we care about money and increasing abortion at any cost possible, including the cost of women. We know they don't care about human life. We know they don't care about children, but I think they're showing their hand now as well. They don't even care about the women they used to espouse to be advocating for. And that's where groups like ADF and your local pregnancy resource centers and Human Coalition and even your legislators have this moral duty to step in and say no more. Enough is enough. Now that Roe is overturned, we can finally act. And really that's what I'm working on now over the spring, which we can get into, of course, Kerby, if you want to, how we can combat the abortion drug.
I think so. Let's take a break, but I might just mention that if you would like to know a little bit more, I do commend to you, and this is the kind of booklet I think should be at every pregnancy resource center, the piece by Liberty McCarter, where she even goes into some of the cases of Alliance Defending Freedom, cases before the Supreme Court and others, as well as many of the dangers of chemical abortion to the woman. Of course, the danger is is obvious to the child. So we'll talk about that. And then when we come back, also put up a piece here by RFK Jr., who was not only encouraged to look in this issue of chemical abortion, but also to look into the issue of gender-affirming care, which is another very significant and related issue, which we did talk about originally in our booklet on transgenderism. And as I've pointed out before, one of the benefits of supporting Point of View is simply to have some of the resources we make available to you. A monthly gift of any side is, of course, you will receive the Outlook magazine. But if you join with us at the Truth Team for $1 a day or more, $30 a month or more, or $360 a year or more, you will receive these booklets. And these are resources which, again, will help you to be very effective. So as we go to a break, as I've mentioned before, let me encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. First of all, you'll see a place where you can give, and if you do so, we would appreciate that. You also see some links to ADF, and we'll talk about what is available through Alliance Defending Freedom. But some of you would like to make a phone call, and I know sometimes the best time to do it is during a break, so give us a call. That number is 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, one of the most influential figures in the development of the American government was the English philosopher John Locke. Thomas Jefferson explained that many of the ideas he drafted into the Declaration of Independence came from Locke. Joe LeConte, who has been a guest on my radio program, has written an insightful essay on the gospel according to Locke. As you might gather from the title, he spends much of the essay showing the connection between Locke's philosophy and biblical principles. The first was his insistence that every human being bore the imprint of an intelligent, personal, and purposeful creator. He wrote that we are the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker. This is an obvious allusion to Ephesians 2:10, where Paul writes that we are God's workmanship. Locke rejected the idea of the divine right of kings, which was used to justify political absolutism. Instead, he argued that government should be based on the consent of the governed. He said if the political authority tries to oppress God's servants by threatening their life, liberty, or property, it becomes morally illegitimate. Locke also rejected the idea of a national creed, Catholicism in France or Calvinism in Geneva. Rather, government should provide equal justice for people of all faiths. No one should be denied essential civil rights because of religion. Joe LeConte concludes that the American founders, supported by the nation's clergy, thoroughly absorbed Locke's political principles from the separation of powers to the separation of church and state. He also adds that Locke was a lifelong student of the Bible. So as you can see, the principles of John Locke provided the foundation for American government. It's time to return to those principles rooted in God's Word. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Israel, go to viewpoints.info/Israel. Viewpoints.info/Israel. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that Chelsey, of course, is also the host of the Next Generation Roundtable. As I mentioned, just as a program note, next Monday, Chelsey and Liberty, as well as I think it is Ethan, I should say, and Patricia are going to be there. And then, of course, there'll be some others. And this hour would be just a great opportunity for those of you that have appreciated what used to be called the Millennial Roundtable, now the Next Generation Roundtable. I'd love to hear from some of you because, again, this is another aspect of one of the many reasons why people should support Point of View. And Chelsey, I really do want to say thank you because I know you're a very busy woman. For you to take that on, I think has been a great service and a great ministry, hasn't it?
Oh, thank you, Kerby. But it's also just an absolute joy to get to be a part of it. I tell my husband all the time, it's almost better than therapy because so much is happening in our world. I think we all look around. It's at breakneck speed. We have more news available at our fingertips than ever, more information available. I don't know that the human heart and mind is meant to process all of that, what's going on in our world, and make sense of it. And Point of View has been such an incredibly strong, faith-based and really moral compass to process all of that and to be able to say, look, here's what is most relevant to us as believers, whether it's culturally, whether it's, talking about end times prophecies, whether it's talking about what our legislatures and Congress is doing, our government systems. There's so much going on, and it's been an absolute joy to do that with fellow believers on Point of View.
Well, again, you do a very good job, and I thank you and Liberty for pulling some of those issues together. And I do know that you have people that say, I just love to hear that. If nothing else, I was sort of giving up on the younger generation, and that's made me really encouraged. So just two things I want to cover, and then we're going to spend some time before the particular segment is up to maybe get an update from the president of Point of View. But let's, if we can, come back to your comment. I'll hold up our booklet again on chemical abortion. And people say, well, then what can we do? I mean, in the past, maybe we could connect up with an abortion-minded woman before she goes into an abortion clinic. Now, a lot of this is basically happening in the privacy of a person's bathroom. They're maybe sometimes even getting these pills, not even from the local drugstore, but from somewhere else. So what is maybe an appropriate strategy to stand for life here in the 21st century?
Yes, I think there's two things, and I'll start with the first. Really, it's a conservative principle, which is working in our own communities. That really begins with us having conversations around our kitchen tables with our children, our grandkids, nieces and nephews about the value of life, and the value of life is rooted in God's love for us. And so it's a really true gospel message that is not an afterthought. It is the core of God created us in his image because he loves us. He has a purpose for our life, and there's nothing more beautiful than that. And then in our churches, in our communities, and having your local pregnancy resource centers, but also groups that work online, supporting those groups to reach her before she reaches the pill. Because as you mentioned, she's logging in online. And so part of our community involvement in addition to supporting women and helping women with childcare, helping women in our communities with rent, single mothers, is also knowing who to support. And groups like Human Coalition, there's a group called Preborn that's come onto the scene. They're doing online advertising, which is very exorbitantly expensive, but it reaches her first. And so investing in those groups that are already there in those spaces is going to be pivotal. But the second piece is the public piece. And that's going to be the piece where you call your legislator, you know who your candidates are, typically Republican candidates who are pro-life, and you hold their feet to the fire and you say, your work is not done in our state. You are not earning our vote. You are not earning our precinct. You do not win your primary unless your first and paramount most issue is protecting the vulnerable. If they're not willing to protect vulnerable children, they're not going to be willing to protect you from all sorts of evil in the world. And so really that point of the legislative side at the state level is going to be the most effective. And there is a bill specifically to combat abortion drug trafficking that Texas just passed, and it allows people to sue anyone mailing the drugs into the state. And it doesn't require a child to die first or a woman to be hospitalized. It says just a mere mailing of a drug into the state is an illicit activity. It's illicit substances, and they're not allowed in the state. And so make sure your state knows about the Texas bill, has a model. You can reach out to us at Alliance Defending Freedom and really begin. And spring is the time. It is the time for these states to start working to pass those protections.
One last maybe comment, and that is in the first hour we talked with Gary Bauer about the difference a year makes. And in some respects, this article I've posted, RFK Jr. is right about gender-affirming care. I just a minute ago mentioned that he's been investigating a so-called abortion pill, but also has brought an investigation of this whole idea of transitioning young children, sometimes because it's supposed to be helpful to them. And in the study, they talk about the fact that there was an original study out of the Netherlands, which has always been questionable. As a matter of fact, it is easily questioned as the fact that we had Marianne Grossman on the program a while back talking about how it was a very small sample. It really excluded minors who were experiencing gender dysphoria, and yet it was used as the justification for gender-affirming care for children under the the age of 18 and this whole expansion of this in various hospitals, some of which we've talked about in our little booklet on, again, transgenderism, because we've had, everybody from Ryan Anderson, who wrote the book When Harry Became Sally, to Abigail Schreier, Irreversible Damage, and many others. And so in some respects, we are at least blessed, aren't we, Chelsey, that we have some people in the Department of Health and Human Services that have pro-life, pro-family, and just pro-morality kind of mindset that is going to prevent some of the kinds of problems we were talking about not so long ago here on Point of View.
Yes. I mean, what a difference a year can make, because I think a year ago now, maybe a little more than a year ago now, the administration was pushing these procedures as fast and hard as possible. And what they do is they muddy the waters with fake science, and it becomes this almost like this evidence war where it's what's a valuable evidence, what's not. I think intuitively every human knows if you give children hormones, cross-sex hormones that are not compatible with their biology, that's going to be incredibly damaging to them long term. Women, unable to breastfeed their children in the future. And that's, not even the worst thing they do to these kids. And we all know that that's damaging, but it's really different when you have the federal government come out with the strongest longitudinal study ever done that tracked those kids and said it's permanent. It's irrevocable damage that is done, and doctors and their licensing groups, which are typically left-leaning and like to make a lot of money off these kids, now they have to pay attention. And hopefully parents will pay attention. And they've been fed a lot of lies, parents that allow their kids to transition and have been told their kids will commit suicide if they don't allow them to transition. And now seeing this study, I hope it makes parents who are told those lies think twice and say, actually, the damage is really exorbitant, what happens to our children when we go down these horrific paths. And I hope it makes them think twice.
Well, Chelsey, we always appreciate your expertise. We look forward to hearing you on Monday. And thank you for joining us here at Point of View, and Happy New Year.
Always a pleasure. Happy New Year to you, too.
Let's, if we can, as we go to a break, come back to the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly. And again, we have a significant need on the table. And sometimes you ask, why do we wait to the last moment? But some people maybe are waiting to the last moment. So indeed, what about this? Because we would like to get a chance to hear how we're doing right now.
We are still at about $50,000 left on the match. So we really do need to hear from you. Kerby, I was thinking about this. We live in some interesting times. I heard you the other day talking about that Gen Z, especially Gen Z young men, are coming back to church, that we now have more Gen Zers showing up on Sunday morning than we do baby boomers.
Yes.
Who would have ever thought? Yeah. But also the other day you talked about how that almost 50% of Gen Z believes that political violence is acceptable.
Yes.
And a high percentage of them think it's necessary. We live in a time that is very conflicted, a very divided nation at this point, almost more so than any time since the Civil War. And I've noticed over the holidays, as I was talking with different family members, the difference of opinions largely comes down to where you get your information from.
Yes.
If you don't have good information, you can't make good decisions. So you need to support Point of View so that we can be here, so that Kerby can continue to bring you the information you need to influence our culture.
Well, let's take a break, and then we'd love to hear from you. Again, you may have been waiting because you didn't want to miss some of the interviews. So again, this is a perfect time to make that call, 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. Of course, you can go to the website at any time, and I hope you'll go there right now, pointofview.net. And again, we have about $50,000 still on the table. So we need to hear from you.
I have little doubt that you already know that in today's world, especially online and through the media, it is lies which are competing for people's attention. And that's why it's critical that we as a nation become re-anchored to biblical truth. We will never restore America's godly heritage without that. When you give to Point of View, you equip listeners around America with that truth. You provide free resources that help them apply truth to real questions, everyday life. You invest in the future of this nation. Your support will make a difference in the fight against lies, in the fight for America's future. and we need to hear from you today. Give before midnight tonight, and your gift will be doubled by a matching challenge. The hours are waning. Give now at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, as I just reflect over the last couple of days and the fact that we're now down to our last half hour, had Penna Dexter on, and that was great to have her in studio. Of course, we had Lathan Watts in studio, but we've also had by phone Kelly Shackelford, Gary Bauer, even Chelsey Youman, and that has been really encouraging, and I think, if nothing else, makes the case for why I hope that you would be a supporter of Point of View. We recognize that many of you listen and have not supported Point of View, and even a one-time gift would be a real encouragement to us. And I know many of you could also support us on a monthly basis. We're beginning to whittle away that last amount of match money, and we certainly would encourage you to do what you can to help us out. And of course, we heard just a minute ago from the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly. Thought it would be good to hear from the vice president of stewardship, Jana Weidler. And Jana, thank you for being with us once again.
Well, hi, Kerby. Good to be here.
Isn't it great to hear from people like Chelsey and Liberty? As you and I travel around, we have people wanting to know about my future. I don't think anybody's ready for me to retire yet, but when you hear from some of these very talented young women and other gifted individuals we've had on the program, I think you can see that that's just another justification for why you should support Point of View.
That's right, Kerby. This ministry is not going away. We are going to continue to reach people with truth and biblical clarity. And you have been so encouraging to so many other young people that have come up under your training and have gone on to do other things. But we have amazing staff. We have amazing people, and the work will go on. God has put it on our hearts, and this ministry is going to keep going. Now, we pray that you remain healthy, obviously.
So far, so good. Yeah.
And nobody does you like you. But yes, we have amazing young people coming up, and they are smart and clever and gifted as well. So we're very proud of that.
One of the other aspects I thought we might mention for just a minute is the podcast, because you and I are starting to notice as we're traveling around, and I might just mention that in 2026, there are a couple of times that we will be face-to-face with some of you listeners, so you be checking with your local radio station with Point of View. We'll let you know when we're coming there, but I've heard more and more people really love these podcasts, and of course you have the full podcast of Point of View, and I'm running into a lot of people, Jana, and you are as well, who listen to the program not live right now, but listening to it when they're working out or driving or whatever. Then, of course, we have the highlights. That's Spotify, Point of View highlights by Spotify, on Spotify, and it's, of course, done by Megan. And then, of course, we've mentioned Liberty before, the Know Why podcast, but I was amazed to see how many people actually listen to these podcasts, and that's just another very significant reason to support Point of View.
That's true, Kerby. And we are actually working on updating our website and looking to launch a new phone app after the first of the year. But these are additional costs for Point of View. But we have been very blessed by some people that are giving specifically towards that. But right now, we need you. If you're listening to my voice right now, I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to the person down the street or across town or in a different state. I'm talking to you. If you hear my voice right now and you have not given a gift yet, please stop what you're doing. We've got this $50,000 remaining match on the table, and we do not want to lose out on the generosity of others that have come before you. So please stop what you're doing, call in or go online and give the best gift you can right now so that we can continue to grow, we can reach younger people, and we can continue to provide you with the information you need so that you can explain the Bible or biblical views on issues in the world today and be knowledgeable about them and feel comfortable speaking about them.
We just got an update, and we're now down to $48,000, so it's moving. And again, anyone that can be involved, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, the number 800-347-5151, and you might be able, if you call that number, to talk to Jana or any of the other staff that are taking those phone calls. Of course, you can go to the website pointofview.net. And again, I thought I would just highlight the fact that when you go there, of course, we have videos, we have our Take Action element. My Viewpoints commentary today is about John Locke, and some people might say, gosh, I've only heard the name. I don't know a thing about him, and that might be worthwhile to just learn a little bit more. And I did one recently where I was just talking about Friedrich Hayek, because people might say, is that the father of Selma Hayek? Oh, no, he's the individual that wrote The Road to Serfdom, but that book is seen still as one of the most significant books to critique socialism. And I know many times we find, Jana, that our listeners say, I appreciate Point of View because you read the books, you read the articles, you summarize them for me. Sometimes I'm so interested I go buy the book or get the article, but in some respects you do the work that I certainly appreciate. And that, again, probably is a very good reason why people should consider what they might do to support Point of View.
Yes, Kerby, I agree. There are people all over the nation, and there's people in other countries that listen to Point of View as well. And to be able to listen to the program and then speak to their friends, their families, their neighbors, or working in their community, being able to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ through biblical views and know what they're talking about and be able to be assured that they're getting the information from a source that is above reproach.
Well, again, I know I want to let you get back to making some phone calls or answering some phone calls, but Jana, thank you for checking in with us, and Happy New Year. Looking forward to seeing you very soon when you and I get traveling again.
Yes, Happy New Year to you and to all of you out there listening. Thank you, Kerby.
Let's take a break in just a minute, but before we do so, let me point you to two other articles, and I'll take one this segment and one more in just a minute. A very good piece by Christopher Wilson, interestingly enough, in which he's talking about the fact that there is a way in which people maybe are going to be looking at issues and then how they're going to vote on those issues a little bit differently. And so this is a pretty significant article, which I would commend to some of you that are going to be involved in political campaigns, or if you're just like many of us around the table, kind of news junkies. How is it that some of the people are starting to reevaluate news and information? And that, of course, gets back to what we provide here at Point of View. And he said, last week, I argued that public frustration was giving away to something more durable, that is sorting. He says voters weren't just venting, they were deciding which institutions felt illegitimate, which explanations no longer deserve patience, and which trade-offs they were no longer willing to tolerate. That's a nice way of summarizing the fact that they're really sorting from abstract judgment, if you will, to concrete evidence. And what is happening is that you've had all sorts of issues, many of which we've already talked about today and others which we've talked about in the past. He talks about some of the stories that drove the week, the release of the additional Epstein-related documents, of course, the Minnesota-Somalia fraud scandal, the renewed focus on legal immigration and H-1B visas, the whole question about foreign policy. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute in terms of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, and then began to see that there are individuals that are sort of reevaluating some of this. And so they've actually put together, these are people that look at politics every day, various indices. And I'm not going to go into the deep weeds. You can read this. It's about 5 pages, but it is fascinating because they first of all have what's called an affordability pressure index. And that is, okay, how much do people actually have problems with the issue of affordability? And you would think that really what happened in Minnesota and affordability, these are not even related. Well, they are, because as I pointed out just a couple minutes ago with Gary Bauer, people that have been paying their taxes and trying to make ends meet get really angry and frustrated when they find out that there have been these fraudulent cases, and I'm supposed to send my tax dollars in, and then it gets fraudulently used, or in some cases misused, and that is the case. They also have what is called a sovereignty security index, because that gets into how safe do I feel. And of course, when we've been talking about wars in Ukraine or Gaza or Venezuela, well, of course, not a war there in Venezuela, but just military action, that is the case. And then they have the elite distrust index, because as you well know, and we've talked about this before, more and more voters are saying, I feel like the elites are making decisions about me and about our future, and I didn't get to vote for those, and they are, in some cases, insulated from the impact of those. You can have open voters, but if I live behind a gated community, no problem there. And so the whole issue they're talking about is how smart campaigns really need to connect with evidence to focus on some of the stories people are talking about. And it's just a fascinating look on where voters are. But if you are feeling frustrated, and I think you probably are, we might see a very different midterm election in 2026. Just an attempt to kind of give you a look ahead of some of the kinds of things we'll be talking about in 2026. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and this is, of course, the last segment, last few minutes before we say goodbye for 2025. And again, we'd love to hear from you. I understand that we had almost all the phones ringing, and of course, why am I not surprised? There are some of you that like to wait to the very last moment, and certainly that is the case. Let me just say right now, in case I get involved in talking about this article about Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, that I will say probably at the end, but let me say right now that even though we're going off the air, we'll still take your phone calls. And of course, you can always go on the website, pointofview.net. You can find many of the articles we've posted today, articles by Gary Bauer and Lathan Watts, an interview with Chelsey Youman and many others, but certainly those are resources that are available there, but you can also, of course, give. And as we said yesterday, and as I've said more than a few times, please consider supporting the local radio station that carries this program. We yesterday did an interview with Troy Miller. Dr. Troy Miller is the president of the National Religious Broadcaster Association, and also, of course, we see him at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention each year. And he was talking about, and we were talking about, some pieces of legislation that will be very important in protecting local radio stations. And we certainly appreciate the station managers and individuals and networks that make this possible. But let me, for just a minute, talk about one other article that I've posted here. It comes from our friends at the Wall Street Journal. It's called The Trump-Netanyahu United Front. The reason I bring it up is, first of all, the other day, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and President Donald Trump met in Mar-a-Lago. And in some respects, that was necessary because the media oftentimes look for changes in attitudes, in alliances and things like that. And for a while, there was this real emphasis, if you will, on, is there a split between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu? And as the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal put it, this was all the talk until they joined to strike the Iranian nuclear program back in June. And then we're starting to hear it again. Anybody that had questions about whether or not they were working together didn't pay attention at the time, because they were convinced that letting Iran continue to develop nuclear materials was just giving them one step closer to developing a nuclear weapon. And that is something they were not going to allow. So, of course, that particular event in June, which we've talked about here on Point of View, now we were starting to hear about it again. So on Monday, both individuals met together. In a sense, what you had is Benjamin Netanyahu flying into Florida to Mar-a-Lago for their sixth meeting of 2025. And as the editors say, no split between the two was in evidence. Ask about the relationship. Donald Trump, of course, always very positive. I don't think it can be better. We just won a big war together. And so, again, this has been something that they were focusing on back when, again, Iran was racing to rebuild its ballistic missile capacity. And so the argument now is, can we bring pressure on the regime without another military strike? And, of course, you heard him talk about this in some detail. We don't want to spend the fuel. We don't want to spend the gas. It's 36-hour flight. We don't want to do any of that. Of course, they could have flown them from other places. And so right now you have a very united front on Iran. And they believe that the best way to pressure the regime is to come to a deal limiting its nuclear and missile capabilities and programs. That is then so Israel or the United States doesn't have to strike again. Also, the president pointed out something that I've been watching, and that is the impact of what is happening on Iran. As he said, they have tremendous inflation, their economy is bust, and the currency has fallen. That is, the Iranian currency has fallen to an all-time low. It takes 1.4 million rials to make a dollar. And I remember from years ago, it took 70 rials to make a dollar, now 1.4 million, which sometimes we've talked about Bitcoin. One of the reasons why Bitcoin has been used by some of the individuals there in Iran is to actually not be subject to this rampant inflation that is absolutely devastating the country. So that is the case. Of course, the other issue was, of course, Hamas. And the same question there is, well, do you both have the same agreement? And they seem to. The peace plan needs to advance to its second stage, and that is disarmament. And I think it is important to point out that if Hamas lives up to that plan, we might really see a lasting peace there. And the editors of the Wall Street Journal went on to say that Donald Trump is right to put disarmament first. There can be no peace as long as Hamas hangs on to its weapons, which are key to its rule over Gaza. So again, it is just a reminder, as we talked about just a few minutes ago with Gary Bauer, about how many things have changed. We talked with him about instead of open borders, we have record low immigration now, instead of sometimes these policies that were actually hurting business. You have, if anything, tax reform, reduced deficits, real wage growth. Instead of a massive government, we are seeing at least some possibilities of shrinking the size of government, though I lament the loss of Doge. But even so, even when the government is large, the Pentagon is really purging some of those woke policies. Of course, we talked about the assault on religious liberty and surveillance, and some of that has simply come to an end. And then we even talked with Chelsey about, even though we can lament about how many abortions taking place, we don't have a federal government right now aggressively promoting abortion, aggressively promoting gender-affirming care, or a variety of other issues like that. And I think it's just a good illustration of some significant changes that have taken place this year. And as we wind down on this issue of Israel, I might remind you that here is a booklet that we've done over the years on the subject of Israel. Of course, we've done some others on the whole issue of Hamas and others, because we think it's important to know about Israel and to think carefully and accurately about that, and even the issue of anti-Semitism. But as a preview, I'm holding up, this is actually the February issue called A Biblical View on Zionism, because we start seeing a number of people having questions from a biblical point of view about should we support the nation of Israel? What about some of the statements being made by Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, and a variety of others? And so, again, these are resources we put in your hands. By the way, if you sign up to be a Truth Team member, this is just one of those that will show up in your mailbox, and those are the kinds of resources we want to put in your hands as we want to educate you and also encourage you to support us so we can educate others and begin to change some of the things happening around our world. If you go to our website, you'll notice we have a banner that says Restoring America's Godly Heritage. That's something else. In 2026, we're going to focus a lot of time and attention on educating people about America's godly heritage. So visit the website, pointofview.net. But even though we're going off the air, you can still give us a call. That number is 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. First of all, I want to thank Megan and Steve for their help behind the scenes making this program possible. We're going to have a tape program tomorrow. We'll see you back here on Friday, right here on Point of View.
I have little doubt that you already know that in today's world, especially online and through the media, it is lies which are competing for people's attention. And that's why it's critical that we as a nation become re-anchored to biblical truth. We will never restore America's godly heritage without that. When you give to Point of View, you equip listeners around America with that truth. You provide free resources that help them apply truth to real questions, everyday life. You invest in the future of this nation. Your support will make a difference in the fight against lies, in the fight for America's future. And we need to hear from you today. Give before midnight tonight, and your gift will be doubled by a matching challenge. The hours are waning. Give now at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.